Can I ask our speakers to come to the front for questions, please?
Yes, they're here.
Yeah. Sure. So wherever you like. Hold on. Okay, do we have any questions from the floor? No? Oh, sorry. Yep.
I've got a question for Dr. Stratford, if that's okay. As you say, the use of this treasure directly to these rescue camps is really exceptional. I'm just wondering, because I think by this time it's well established that things pertaining to the royal dignity are inalienable and shouldn't be given away. What did people think of this treasure being?
You've got this very interesting thing, the ancient jewels of the crown, haven't you, in mind? I'd like to ask everybody what they think that means. When Richard II took some crown jewels to Ireland, that was one of the accusations, wasn't it? I don't think it applied to everything at all. I think if you tried to pledge the great crown, I mean the king's personal crown, that wouldn't do at all. But there's this huge amount of stuff, and I think essentially what's pledged, some of it, like the collar, and maybe that was a matter of prestige for the Londoners, that they really had to have something that was personal of the king, as well as very valuable. But lots of this stuff, I think, was in store or not in current use. I don't think there's any question that Henry went to France not suitably magnificent. I think it's quite clear he had plenty of stuff in France. We've got that document, haven't we, which is in Reimer, about some of the stuff that was lost on the battlefield. Not the baggage, I don't mean, but what was it? I can't quite remember which bit of the supplies of silver needed for everyday use was stolen. So I think, and I'd love to know what you and other people here think, I think the ancient jewels of the crown has a limited application.
This gentleman about there?
Can I ask each one of you a question to follow up on the first question for Dr. Stratford? Because what you describe strikes me as what is really a continuation of a very ancient practice, that the hoard of a king is an important aspect of warfare going back centuries, that a king needs a hoard in order to hand stuff out to his followers to keep them happy, and while he goes to war he adds to the hoard if he is successful. It seems to me that using your wealth, using the jewels, all this stuff you have, is a time-honoured practice, but what you're suggesting is that it sort of stopped and Henry picks it up again and it is something new?
I think so. I think it's really exceptional, and it's absolutely not meant to stay with them. The few cases where an object or several objects stay with a captain, those cases are exceptional. It's meant to come back to the crown, whereas the very interesting other situation, maybe things were handed out directly as payment. I think this, in the context of the 15th century, really is exceptional.
Dr. Cunningham, what you describe is astonishingly conservative practice, that they want to do the same thing in 1475 and in 1492 as they did in 1415, which sort of, I don't want to maybe push in the direction of putting it within the context of the military revolution that may or may not have happened in the century. What I would want to ask you, though, is that the interpretation of the definition of strategy you maintain is a very common one of understanding strategy as planning and administration of war. Could I ask you, though, whether the practice you've detected of using the archives also gives some indication of the use of armed force, whether the armies were put to the same kind of, they were planning to put the armies to the same kind of use for the same kind of strategic objectives in support of what still was the same political objective in 1475 and 1492, or is that changing?
I think there's limited options with the campaigns they're planning because it's a cross-channel raid basically to get a bridgehead, and then maybe something else will emerge. And I think certainly in 1492 Henry VII is planning to do that, and John Curran has written a lot about his intentions to sort of overwinter and then use that as a base to break out of the Calais Pale and do something more substantial. But I think the smallness of the army initially is a manageable expedition in terms of supply and victualling and feeding across the channel. You don't want to leave them isolated. So I think there's potentially more to come, but we don't know what that was because it didn't transpire in the way that Henry V was able to build on 1415 into a wider campaign and conquest. So it's impossible to say because the nature of the campaign as it was set up was following the set pattern with the limited objectives, and it was following a pattern that had proved successful in the past as a way of starting off something bigger, and we don't really know what that might have emerged into. We might have this sort of big goal of reconquering Normandy eventually and getting some of the southwestern lands back, but that would have followed as success had been built on more success.
Yeah, so the suggestion is that the practice is really conservative in intent as well.
It's what people would know, what the soldiers would be comfortable with. They wouldn't want to be away for too long. You find that in the Scottish campaigns when the wages run out, people start deserting. When the weather is bad, they start drifting away from the border. So discipline starts to break down then, and it's not really worth having a massive army which is uncontrollable. It does as much damage to the English side as it does to the Scots.
Yeah, so not much of a military revolution either.
Not when it's pouring down all seas.
Generalship. Final question for, sorry, I need to check the Mr. Galastegi. It seems to me, but I'll be talking about the same sort of subject area tomorrow, but it seems to me that what both the Rogers and the Gillingham really relate to Smale paradigm, you call it, seems to struggle with is the frequency of battle.
Yeah, I think.
Which is a long-standing issue in medieval military history. There is an assumption in most military history, and you mentioned that in most military history is that battle really should stand at the center of military operations. Because in battle you can make your enemy defenseless, and enemy who is defenseless you can impose your will upon him. And the peculiarity of medieval warfare is that the frequency of battle is so much less than it is in earlier and later periods of warfare, at least in the West. So the question which Smale tried to answer in a way slightly differently from Gillingham, I would think, is why there was so little battle. And Rogers reacts against that and says that these explanations, they were trying to seek battle. So the universal paradigm really applies to medieval warfare as well. Now, what Rogers doesn't really address is the question why you still have far fewer than you have in other periods. The problem with Gillingham is very much that he doesn't really come up with a very convincing answer why it's not so frequent either, other than something which we sympathise with as modern observers of warfare, and as warfare is pretty awful. Battle is particularly awful because that's when most people die, so people would naturally look for alternative ways of fighting or conducting warfare, and hence I can explain medieval warfare, because they were so afraid of battle, because it was so bloody, so awful, that they were doing all these other things instead, which surely isn't much of an answer, because it should also apply to the previous and the later period when warfare was just as awful. Lots of people died in battle, and people therefore must have had quite an incentive to avoid it all the time as well. It seems to me that you're trying to have it every which way. All these theories sort of apply, and it's still all universal. I've got my battle avoidance as well, and it sort of all fits and it makes sense. can I push you a bit more on what your specific evidence is that one of the guys in your civil war was actually really looking for battle and the other one trying to avoid it? What's the evidence?
Well, for that, I think that the Chronicles doesn't work because they are written before after the events, and they have a clear propaganda purpose. But I found a letter I have said, I think, to Ferdinand, to his father, asking for, telling him that he want to engage in battle with the Portuguese king to finish the war rapidly. And I think that if there is a private letter between him and his father, could be more valid for knowing what was going to be his strategy, no?
And that is not propagandistic.
Well, it's not an open letter. In the letter, Ferdinand was asking for help to his father, what he can do to defeat the enemy, and his father told him that he must engage battle to finish the war rapidly, because a civil war if times goes by, it is harder to finish the war, and the factions must move much. I don't know if I'm explaining well, maybe because of my English, but I'm trying to say that in a private letter to his father, he has no reasons to lie, because he is asking for help. That is my main source.
Can I just respond to what you were saying, actually? It's a very, very thorny area, isn't it, this battle-seeking thing, and whether people are or aren't seeking battle. And I think it obviously depends on the region, and then, of course, you get into a whole thing, which I'm sure we don't want to go into now, of what it actually is a battle, you know. Is it is it numbers, is it commanders? I mean, so it's an area that does need more research, but I see your point. If you're in a civil war situation, you don't want to be... you want to resolve it quickly. You can't have these long, protracted campaigns. So I think that's what you're trying to say. Is that all? Yeah. Because
if we look at the example of the War of the Roses, I think Matthew Bennett wrote that the campaigns were short and it ended in battles, and that the War of the Roses has many battles.
Yeah, it's a regional thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Is it my paradigm tomorrow?
Well, I think we'll look forward to it. Yes, gentlemen.
Thank you for welcoming the Bennett Hooper paradigm. Yes, but I think we've worked over the bit about civil war. What the modern armies talk about when they talk about variations of strategy is contingency. That is the current buzzword. It's partly because the modern British Army doesn't know what it's for or where it's going, what it might have to do. But that's often the case of military organisations, ancient and modern, and sometimes the fact they're there drives policy, which drives strategy. Whereas, you mentioned that Clausewitzian idea of politics, war being an extension of politics. Maurice Keene is one of the most keen observers of medieval warfare. In the Middle Ages, it was the other way round. The need for war directed politics and the need for demonstrative action of one form or another. But as we all know, most military activity was raids, chevauchés, sieges, and whether you actually end up fighting a confrontation in open field, as you did rarely, is a matter of contingency. Rogers tries to say in his dialectics of strategy that the chevauchée, the English chevauchée, was always intended to bring the French on and then beat them. Whereas I think the reality is that you might be an option, or you might just keep on running, or doing something else, or retiring into a fortification. And just regards the letter, there's a letter by Edward III after Crécy, in which he says, it was his intention to fight a battle and defeat the King of France in open field. But that was afterwards. And in actual fact, that may not have been his intention. It didn't look like his intention when he was heading northwards as quickly as possible to avoid meeting a larger army. Sorry, that's rather long, but do you see what I mean about, I was just trying to draw some threads together.
Okay. This lady at the front here.
I wondered if the last speaker, or indeed the last questioner, had any thoughts about why the Battle of the Wars of the Roses fought in Ireland in 1462. One commander on one side was said to have not engaged because it was not a good idea to fight a battle on a Monday. Has anybody come across any other instance of days of the week being sensitive in this connection?
Should you fight on Easter Sunday or should you fight on Palm Sunday?
Well,
In both cases they decided they would, didn't they?
according to the peace and truce of God idea, you didn't fight on various days, but Monday was the day that was available.
It was available.
Yeah, normally it was available.
There's no reason why.
Well, from the War of the Roses, I only have quote Matthew Bennett. I am not expert in it, but I have to make clear that in this debate I'm with Roy Gillingham. So what I'm trying to say is that what Roger say is also in it's compatible with vegetarian strategy. It's not incompatible because Roger said that some commander seek battle, saw battle in Middle Ages, but they saw battle because they thought that victory was certain, or because they hadn't any other option. I mean, Ferdinand saw battle because in a civil war, if there is another contender, another contender who claim that he is also the king, you must defeat it. You need a clear defeat in the battle. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know if it's clear.
It's good. No?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Elizabeth, could I just say that I think the Monday thing was Black Monday in 1359, the unlucky day when the temperature suddenly dropped and everyone froze in William's campaign, because there are a lot of 15th century references to it being an unlucky day for battle and other things. And it's interesting, it's so strongly remembered. So I think that is the specific link.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Michael, I cut across you. I just wanted to tell you.
I'll talk to you about that later.
I was merely going to say, with reference to one of our other anniversaries at the moment, Waterloo, that in a slightly different context, the Duke of Wellington said, if I won't win, I don't fight. And then he gets landed at the Battle of Waterloo, which surely is as close a run battle as you could possibly have. And he did it because he had to. And he had to because Napoleon was facing two armies which collectively were bigger than him, and he had to as well. So the circumstances can force you to break your principles, and there comes a time when you simply have to fight.
And this is what the heralds are for. Before the battle, they arranged the field and they arranged the day. And at Flodden, James IV is accused of not playing the right game by refusing to come and fight as arranged. And it's actually fought on a couple of days after it was meant to be fought. So there is arrangements about how it's to be set up. It's a bit like, is it in Cromwell at the Battle of Edgehill, where they're all looking at their watches, waiting for the time to start, and Cromwell just fires his cannons and everyone goes for it. So there's a gentleman's agreement about how war is to be conducted.
Bennett burns by a battle by appointment, isn't it? The castle will be surrendered the following day, and a whole year passes until Edward II appears, and the battle has to be fought that day, because next day the whole point of the battle will be decided anyway.
Edward I makes the garrison of Stirling go back in so he can fire his Luc de Guerre at the walls, so they can at least say they had a period under fire before they surrendered.
Anyone else? Yep, Chris.
Can I revert to Jenny's paper? I'm very interested. Part of the discussion here, and couple of sessions has been about planning and how people can assemble armies and things. Is there any does Henry V really know how much cash or cash equivalent he's got locked up in this treasure? And is there any evidence that that's used for planning purposes? He knows he needs so much because that's what he can afford. Or
what an interesting idea. I think he must have known very approximately. It would have been absolutely impossible in the time scale for everything to have been weighed and assessed. Although we do know that on occasion things were weighed and assessed newly, as in that Felbury case, they simply couldn't have done it for the hundreds of pieces. The household stuff they knew because every time the keeper changed of the household, as you know, it was weighed and valued and checked perfectly. So that was easy. The chapel, I think, was probably more difficult. I don't suppose they had an absolutely current valuation. I got into this a rather funny way round because I was working on Richard II's treasure and discovered that going backwards some of it came from much earlier reigns, but that going forward it was dispersed in various ways, including the use for Agincourt. And I think the chamber stuff, some of it, they knew the value perfectly well because it came during those 4 years, absolutely tight period, and was so incredibly valuable, they must have known. But on the other hand, the valuations put on things when they're issued to the captains often differ very substantially from the earlier Richard II valuations and occasionally from later valuations, with the big pieces, the really distinctive pieces that you can trace over quite a long period, even up to 80 years.
is there any sort of reason to that? Are they overvalued or undervalued, or is there just no consistency?
It's terribly interesting. I don't think there's a consistent pattern. Some things are damaged. There's a very wonderful ornamental ship, or nef, that's pledged to the Earl of Salisbury, and that was clearly damaged when it went to him, and he, instead of pledging it with people in London or anywhere else, actually took it with him, repaired it, so when that came back it was worth slightly more than when it had been pledged to him. So there are cases in every direction. It's really, really fascinating. And of course endlessly fiddly detail going from one financial record to another.
Can I just quickly ask Sean a question? When you were talking about, I didn't know this, that Edward IV actually camped on the Agincourt battlefield, which is actually quite interesting within itself. Was it always to Henry V that the later medieval king looked back to? Or was this an issue of sort of medieval living memory almost? Or did they look back to Edward III at Crescia, for example?
I think it probably is an element of sort of the hero king who achieved great things, and Henry would be the most recent version of that, in that some of those people in 1475 would be the sons of people who fought at the end of the 1440s. And some of them might have been individuals who had been involved as well. So I think that was a stronger kind of motif for them to hold on to, but clearly the 14th century campaigning was more spectacular in that it was the first time the English had won these victories, almost proving they could do it. So there's not a lot of referencing back that far, but clearly there is in the search of the records, because the bigger the campaign, the more planning there is, the more elements there are to draw together. So the accumulation of information probably did look back that far, but I think the inspiration comes from the stories and the tales rather than the actual nuts and bolts.
Fair enough. Anyone else? Yes, gentleman in the back.
If I may return to Ekait's lecture on the Battle of Toro, in my opinion, the Battle of Toro is clearly an example of a situation where one of the parts seizes an opportunity to precipitate the battle. Alphonse V, the King of Portugal, was making an enormous devastation in the Castilian territory during many, many months. Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabel were still in a political weak position in some way, with the Castilian nobility clearly divided. And they seized the opportunity when the Portuguese army left Zamora, not in a very cautious way, and went to Toro, with part of the army, the part commanded by Alphonse V, already inside the fortress of Toro, and then Ferdinand understood that that was his opportunity to attack the Portuguese army and to achieve a victory which will end the campaign and provoke a final result which was very convincing for the Castilian armies. This battle is particularly strange because, in fact, it was fought in two different parts of the terrain. In one of these parts, Ferdinand of Aragon defeated the Portuguese king, but in the other part of the terrain, the Portuguese prince, John, the future John II, defeated the opposite army. And so during many, many years, Portuguese and Spanish Castilians had commemorated the victory in this battle during many years. So the last comment is that the Castilians had won the battle where it was really important to win. I mean, the battle fought between Ferdinand of Aragon and the Portuguese king Alphonse V. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Well, I've got one for Jenny. You're talking about these. Now you said there's only about half of the jewels. Now, this is like you're trying to guess what. Do we know how much from you said you looked at Richard II reign? So, if there's roughly the same amount of jewels in the royal collection, as it were, do we know how much of the records we have for the 14-15 campaign? So you think you said it was it £25,000 worth in all money?
That's what I added up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So do we know? I mean, what percentage say that would be of say what was in Richard II's treasury? Or
Well, some of the very most valuable things came from the Valois. Then there are the crowns, including the Great Crown, which Richard II's reign was estimated to be worth an absolutely unbelievable amount of money, £33,000 or something. And I don't think it would be safe to make a direct comparison.
okay.
The only thing I could do was see how, with the help of the Southampton database and generous supply of information, see how many of the captains we have accounts for.
Yeah.
Add those up, came out to be about 50%, as I said.
Sure.
But whether the others had as valuable stuff, we do not know. But the fact is that, as probably everybody here knows, it's so difficult to know exactly what was in the chamber at any one time, as opposed to the household. These shining opportunities, Richard II's minority, the deposition of Richard II, and the Agincourt campaign are sort of miraculous windows on all this. But basically, I think of it like Fort Knox. It's the security of the kingdom, this stuff. It's guaranteeing the solvency, really, isn't it? But in my opinion, very, very exceptional use of it for Agincourt.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No? Right, okay, well let's put our hands together for our speakers. 3 very excellent talks, so thank you.